My mother slid a check across a school desk and told the woman I loved to name her price. The paper was heavy, the number bigger than most people's houses. A few nights later, that same woman looked me straight in the eye and asked, "So I was just your test?" And before I could catch my breath, a socialite I'd known since childhood texted me to meet her at a dark pier, and two big men stepped out of the shadows like punctuation. If it were you, what would you have done? My name is Raymond Johnson, and this is the ugliest, truest thing I've ever said out loud about my life. I grew up with a chandelier that threw gold across marble floors, with doors that opened because someone else's hand reached first, with drivers who knew which gate to use so nobody saw me wait. People think that kind of life is a cloud you sit on soft and bright, but clouds have weight, and when they come down hard. Here's the problem money never solved for me. I could buy silence, privacy, access, but I could not buy the thing I needed most, the simple knowledge that if I lost every last bit of it, someone would still pick me out of a crowd and say, "That one, I see that one." So one night, when Laros was humming like a patient city and the lights across the bay blinked like a tired heartbeat, I told my driver, David, that I wanted to disappear. Not forever, not into scandal, just into the kind of invisibility that forces people to deal with you as you are. "A beggar," he said, and the word hung in my bedroom like smoke. "Yes," I said, and once I heard it outside my head, it sounded less like a stunt and more like an admission. I don't know how to be loved the ordinary way. You know what I mean. We built a disguise. Old trousers with a knee that sagged a shirt that used to belong to someone who did not have time to care how it fit, shoes with a history they didn't hide. We parked the cars far away and walked the last blocks like regular air. I kept a tin can in front of me because you can't pretend to be invisible if you won't do the basic choreography of being overlooked. And the first morning I sat on a cracked piece of Laros pavement while the city conducted around me. Horns like arguments, vendors singing prices, tires wearing down lanes that never got enough sleep. People stepped around me as if I were a wet patch they didn't want on their shoes. Coins clinked into the can like apologies thrown from a moving car. A woman in a yellow dress wrinkled her nose and said, "Get a job," and it felt like being told to be taller. Then evening slid in, soft and forgiving, and a young woman carrying groceries stopped not to inspect the problem, but to greet a person. "Are you hungry?" she asked, and the question did not come from pity, it came from community. She handed me bread and water, nodded, like kindness is a habit you can practice, and walked away before I could wrap that moment in anything grand. Kindness moves quick. It does not pose. I watched her go and felt small in a way that didn't make me flinch, small like humility, like the first step before the first step. Pattern interrupt. That loaf of bread weighed more in my hands than my Rolex ever did. I went back the next day because something in me needed to learn the grammar of being unseen. The market was a choir that afternoon, roasted corn and fried plantain in the air, a rhythm section of impatient drivers. And right when I started to feel like furniture, a thief ran past with an older woman's purse and split the crowd into chaos. Then a police officer appeared the way a straight line appears across a page. Calm, deliberate, not here for adrenaline, here for the job. When the thief drew a gun, everyone pulled back like the street had teeth. She did not. "Drop the bag and the weapon," she said, and the words were simple, not dramatic, but they carried weight because she believed them. He hesitated. She moved quick and clean, and suddenly the weapon was on the ground, and the purse was in the owner's hands, and the crowd had to remember how lungs work. I told her that was incredible because sometimes awe sounds like a dumb sentence. She said, just doing my job, and walked on, and I didn't fall in love with her, but I fell in love with the standards she carried. Hold that thought, because standards matter later. A few days after that, I pushed open the door to a coffee shop that smelled like second chances. I did not belong, and everyone knew it. Some people stared the way people stare at a headline waiting to see the twist. The barista, short afro, sharp eyes, kind mouth, came over and asked if she could help me. I said I only needed a place to sit where the room didn't flinch when I breathed. She nodded, brought me a cup anyway, said, "It's on the house like generosity is muscle memory." When a group of loud women arrived and decided to point me out to the ceiling, the barista cut them off with a sentence so clean it left no crumbs. "He's a customer. If respect is expensive for you today, we'll understand if you can't afford it." The room shifted small, but it shifted. Her name was Anita. Remember that name. And then, on a rainy evening, when the city felt like a secret told slowly, I met Sophie. Not in the coffee shop, in the market. A black car idled. Two men in suits carved space for a young woman in an elegant dress, the kind of elegance that says don't touch, the kind of security that practices erasing obstacles. One of them shoved me aside. It wasn't personal, not to him. To me, it was a sentence. Before I could swallow the sting, a voice behind me said, "Hey, leave him alone, sharp enough to cut, steady enough to hold." She was small, but even her smallness took up space, the kind that makes bullies look at their shoes. She checked on me first, then faced the men like a teacher who is over it. They backed off because confidence is a language blunt people pretend they can't read, but they understand it fine. She took me for a simple plate of rice and stew and asked me questions that were actually questions, not opportunities to rehearse her opinion. She told me about her classroom, about kids who show up early because the building has breakfast, about a dream she had to open an after-school center so nobody had to choose between being alone or being unsafe. I told her I was a graduate trying to find work, and I hated the way the lie fit my mouth, but I said it because I was cowardly about the one thing I should have been brave about. And still, something honest woke up in me at that table. I liked how I sounded when I talked to her. We kept running into each other. Then we started aiming our days so we'd collide. If you have ever fallen in love in slow motion, you know how this goes. A joke that lingers in the air, a look that returns to your face like a boomerang, a sentence you don't want to end. She laughed with her whole face. She listened with her shoulders. She noticed when I fell quiet and didn't rush in with noise. She said, "You're different," and I wanted to say, "only around you," but I swallowed it because I was trying to keep the illusion on its feet long enough to say what I should have said the first day. Then the illusion tripped me. I was about to tell her the truth in a corner booth at Anita's when two men in suits walked in, scanned the room the way scanners scan, and said, "Sir, your presence is requested." The entire shop heard it. Their tone, the words, the way they didn't bother to pretend I wasn't who I was. They ripped the thin curtain I'd been standing behind. Sophie's eyebrows raised the question her mouth didn't need to ask. I mumble-called something that wasn't a lie and wasn't the truth, and let myself be escorted out like a secret. Pattern interrupt. If you've ever watched a moment that should have been yours walk out without you, you know the taste it leaves. That night, I made the worst decision of this whole story. Pacing my bedroom under the chandelier I used to love, and now resented. I told David I was afraid. Afraid that when the money walked into the room, love would leave. Afraid that truth would cost me something I wanted to keep. He said if she's real, there is no price, and offered to test it. I should have said no. I said yes. He put on one of my suits, took one of my cars, and waited at the bus stop Sophie used after school. He called himself Daniel, smiled like money smiles, and held up a shiny new phone like a promise. She looked at him the way a person looks at a trick, then at the hand doing the trick. "Are you trying to buy me?" she asked. He kept acting. She said, "I'm in love with someone, and you can't change that with a car or a phone," and walked away spine straight like a statement. David came home, dropped the phone on my table, and said, "She's not for sale." You'd think the next thing I did would be the right thing. It wasn't. I asked Sophie to meet me at the lake at sunset. The light laid itself across the water like a promise. I told her everything. That I am Raymond Johnson, that I run Johnson Enterprises, that the clothes and the tin can and the story were a disguise I wore to make sure someone's love wasn't a reflection of my bank account. She didn't slap me, didn't yell. She let the silence do the work. Then she said, "So I was your test, and if you've never heard 5 small words rearrange the furniture in your chest, consider yourself lucky." I reached for her hand, she stepped back, and I felt every inch of the distance I'd created. After that, my phone turned into a courtroom. My parents found out I was seeing a teacher from a modest family and started saying words like optics and legacy and suitability, words that make a life sound like a resume. They brought up Brenda Benson, the socialite, who has been the approved match since we were kids. Brenda is beautiful in a way that feels curated. She slid into our dining room with smooth jokes and a perfect memory for our family's good years, and said we should consider what we could build. I told her I was in love with someone else. She smiled, but her eyes got very still. Then my mother went to Sophie's school, pulled out a checkbook, wrote a number that could move mountains, and slid it across a desk like a bribe could be called a blessing if you kept your face kind. Sophie tore the check in half, handed the pieces back, and said, "You can't buy my love or my silence." A gossip blog ran a story the next day about a possible gold digger, and people who had never met Sophie suddenly became experts on her character. Anita showed me the headline over the counter and said, "They picked the wrong teacher, and for a second, the coffee shop smelled like a rally." I confronted my parents in the sitting room that always felt like a museum that forgot to put up ropes. I said, "You don't have to like my choices, but you don't get to poison them." And for the first time in my life, I watched my father look at me like I was not part of a plan. I was a person he might lose. They told me they were protecting me. I told them they were protecting a performance. We stared at each other across a rug that had seen too many arguments and not enough apologies. Then came the text I should have ignored. "Meet me at the old pier. Come alone. If you're yelling at the screen right now, I hear you." I went anyway because I thought honesty sometimes needed scenery. Brenda stepped out of the dim circle under a streetlight. Like she'd rehearsed, it said she wasn't my enemy, said she wanted me to see reason. 2 men walked out of the dark behind me, hands the size of decisions. I told them calmly what would happen if anything happened to me, about how expensive attention can get when it turns toward the wrong people. Brenda's mouth did a small smile that wasn't humor, and she said, "This isn't over." She was right. It wasn't. It flipped. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. I called David and said we were done playing defense. First, I asked Sophie if I could meet her family, not as an ambush, not to prove a point, just to stand where she stands and listen to the people who built the person I was trying to love. Their house was small in the way that tells you somebody cared about every square foot. Her mother looked me over like a mother should, not impressed, not intimidated, just measuring. Her father shook my hand like a man who has seen promises keep and promises break. The twins, full of questions, wanted to know if I was really a billionaire. I told them that's what people say, and then I told them the part that matters, that money only matters if you use it to treat people better, not worse. At dinner, I did not audition for son-in-law of the year. I answered questions I didn't want to answer and let silence sit where it needed to sit. When we left, Sophie said, "You did better than I expected," which from her is like somebody handing you a certificate that says keep going. Next, I brought Sophie to my parents' estate, not to trap anyone, but to force honesty into a room that usually prefers strategy. "You met her behind my back," I told my parents. "Now meet her with respect." Sophie stood in that expensive air with her shoulders back and said, "I didn't grow up with your kind of problems, but I'm not afraid of mine, and I'm not afraid to stand next to your son." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded with the things we no longer wanted to pretend. My father softened 1 degree. My mother blinked like someone had changed the ending. And then I did the unpredictable thing, the twist that turned the air inside our house into a different weather system. I announced a gala, not the usual performance, not a night for photographs and gossip columns, but a fundraiser for the after-school center. Sophie dreamed about the first of many if I had my way. I put my name on the invites. I put her program at the center of the evening, and when the room filled with donors and board members and cameras, I took the stage and told the truth the way I should have told it at the lake. No PR spin, no pre-approved phrases. I said I had lied to a woman I love because I was exhausted by the ways money edits affection. I said the only way to keep love honest is to keep it outside where it can breathe. I said my parents had tried to protect an image that did not need saving. Then I dropped the part that made the room forget their forks. Effective immediately, I said, I am stepping down as CEO and placing controlling voting rights of my shares into a public interest foundation, whose first grant will fund a network of after-school centers across Laros, beginning with the program Sophie and her colleagues will run. Yeah, that happened. Some faces looked like they'd swallowed a lemon. Some faces looked like someone just lifted a weight they didn't know they were carrying. The board tried to remember their training. My parents looked stunned, and then something else, something not for cameras. People asked later if that was fair, if the city should benefit from my confession, if the move was mature or performative. Here's what I know. I did not run from responsibility, I changed the shape of it. I did not torch my legacy, and I tried to make it breathe without my hands on its throat. Sophie did not run across the room into my arms. She walked to the podium, told stories about kids who stay late because the building feels kinder than the street. About a boy who flinched at loud voices until he learned to make his own in debate club, about the difference between charity and commitment. She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. The room stood up and clapped because the truth has a noise all its own. After the event, we stepped into a quiet hallway that smelled like lilies and money, and she said, "That was a lot." I nodded because sometimes a man's mouth should take a back seat. "It's the truth I should have led with," I said. "Trust isn't a switch," she said. "It's a daily habit." Then she asked me a question that recentered the whole thing. "If you weren't a billionaire, tomorrow would you still do what you did tonight?" I told her yes because I finally understood that the only thing I liked about power was using it to keep other people from being made small. "If it were you, what would you have said?" 2 mornings later, David handed me a folder. Inside were receipts people thought were invisible payments to gossip blogs. Timestamps, a blurry clip from a shop camera near the pier showing Brenda in conversation with 2 men who looked very familiar. A project brief from a third-party consultant hired by people who use the word narrative like a scalpel. We spread the papers across my parents' coffee table and let them look. My mother didn't deny. My father sat down because standing suddenly seemed like work. "This ends now," I said, not loud, not cruel. "You don't have to bless my choices, but you cannot sandbag them in the dark." My mother said, "We wanted what's best for you," and for the first time I believed she meant it, but misunderstood what best meant. "Then trust me to know what that is," I said. It was not a movie ending. There was no score. Just the sensation that we had opened a window in a room that smelled like stale expectations. The weeks that followed were quiet and practical. I did not send flowers the size of furniture. I showed up after school and moved old desks so the first center could breathe. I met contractors and learned more about fire exits than any billionaire should ever be allowed to ignore. The police officer from the purse incident came by on her own time and taught a self-defense class to middle school girls who asked questions faster than she could answer. Anita collected donated books and ruled out anything that smelled like a lecture. We painted walls and laughed when paint got on shoes. It was messy and real, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like my days had corners I did not mind turning. Sophie didn't pretend my confession had fixed everything. She told me plainly that trust is like teeth. You take care of it daily or you lose it quietly. We set rules. No more tests, no surprises and public apologies before sunset. We walked a lot, the kind of walks where silence isn't punishment, it's rest. I met her students and learned names on purpose. She met a side of my family history I don't tell at galas. We went to counseling with my parents, sat in chairs that did not care about last names, said things that tasted like leaves, bitter and necessary. My mother told a story about her own mother, and the day a door did not open for them. My father admitted that legacy is sometimes another way to spell fear. I said out loud that I was tired of performing competence so efficiently that no one bothered to ask if I was okay. Yeah, that happened. We got engaged by the lake. No drone, no fireworks, just the water that had heard me lie and heard me tell the truth, and I told her I would practice trust like brushing my teeth daily, not glamorous, but the habit that keeps everything else from falling apart. She said, "Okay, but remember the rule," and I said, "No more tests." I still wake up sometimes thinking I should run another experiment, and then I drink a glass of water, text her a small true thing, and let the day be a day, not a lab. So here's the part where I hand it to you, because this story does not get to end in my mouth. Do you think what I did at the start is unforgivable, or do you think desperate people do desperate, stupid things when the stakes feel like identity? Do you believe deception can ever be justified if the truth it reveals changes how you live? Or is that a tidy excuse people like me tell ourselves to sleep? If it were you, would you have torn the check? Would you have stayed after the confession? Would you have told your parents to sit down and listen? Would you have walked away from a company to prove a point? Or is that just a rich man's theater? I will tell you what I tell myself when the past wants to run laps in my head. Don't run your relationships like a lab. Don't run your life like a press release. Don't call control a test, and then be surprised when the result hurts. I wanted to know if love could survive without money, and the only way I know to answer that now is to treat people with dignity before I ask them to treat me with any. Sophie taught me that in a market, Anita reminded me with coffee. A police officer showed me with steady hands. David stood next to me when I was wrong, and when I tried to be right, my parents learned to love me larger than a headline. That's the miracle, not the gala. The miracle is that dignity can still grow in rooms where it used to be unwelcome. We opened the first after-school center in a building the city forgot, and turned the lights on for kids who deserved bright long before my conscience finally woke up. The night we cut the ribbon, a little girl grabbed the mic and said she wanted to be a judge so nobody could buy her opinion. Everybody clapped. I looked at Sophie and she squeezed my hand, small, firm, like an anchor, like a promise. We walked home past a street that used to ignore me, and for once I didn't need anyone to see me to feel seen. Now it's your turn. If this made you angry, say it. If it made you feel seen, say that too. Drop a comment and tell me where you draw the line between protecting yourself and controlling someone else. Tell me about the moment you learned that honesty has to live outside where it can breathe. Tell me the time someone tried to buy your silence and how you answered. Do you think I did the right thing at the gala? Or was it theater dressed up as virtue? Do you think rich families should get to curate love to protect legacy? Or should legacy be rebuilt so love doesn't need permission? If this story hit you, hit like so it finds someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe. If you want more of these messy, honest dives into real life, and tell me where you're watching from. Laros Lagos, London, Little Rock. I want to see how far this conversation can travel. Share your take, your pushback, your own story in the comments. I started this by asking for the truth, and I'm ending it the only way that makes sense, by asking for yours.